How are you? It's wonderful to see you on this Sunday morning. Thanks for being here. Nate, Christian, it is great to hear from you. When we dreamed 6 years ago about launching Kingstown, we were praying for people just like you. People who have been out of the church for a while and are finding their way back in, but not sure exactly if they're going to be welcomed or it's the right place for them. That's what we want to be true of the pews here, and we want it to be true at Kingstown. Christian, I was thinking about you in Vacation Bible School. I remember we had talent shows here, and often you would do interesting things at the talent show, like having strings with lights on the end of them and swinging them into beats with music that we applauded for no reason, but we watched. So it's wonderful to watch you finding your way out of the church and finding your way back in, and then kind of like this story, the person who shows up at the end ends up being in charge, right? So it's wonderful to watch you become a Christian leader at Kingstown Communion. So thank you for what you're doing. Deborah Jones, who runs the bell choirs at the church, over Christmas gave me a book called The Book of Joy. It's written by Douglas Abrams, who interviewed His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Near the last third of the book, there's a chapter called Gratitude. Every day, think as you wake up, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it, the Dalai Lama has often said. The topic was gratitude, and it was fascinating to see how often the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama stopped to express their gratitude for each other, for all who were making their time together possible, and for each and everything that they were witnessing. I had noticed how the Archbishop greets almost every new experience with the word wonderful, and it is indeed that ability to see wonder, surprise, possibility in each experience and each encounter that is a core aspect of joy. So I was wondering if you have gratitude, appreciation, an experience of God's goodness, God's mercy, God's undeserved favor. Are the things you can think of and go, I'm so glad I have that. So I was wondering if you could think of three things for which you're grateful, for which you are appreciative, three things that are undeserved mercy that you have in your life. Can you think of three? So what I want you to do is to find somebody who looks safe seated near you. It's about 90% of the congregation. So find somebody who looks safe that's near you and tell them your three things and listen to their three things. You ready? 1, 2, 3, go. You okay? Thank you. I wish you could be up here to watch because as sad as your faces looked when I began the sermon, by the time you started talking about what makes you grateful, your countenance changes. Our moods change. So my three are spring. It is a marvelous thing to be alive when you can look outside, and I did nothing to make the blossoms bloom or create a 72-degree day, but it's absolutely delightful. I have three of the only and best perfect grandchildren in the history of humanity, Claire and Elise and Grace. And every morning I do a series of exercises in which I stretch my body, and then the first words that come out of my mouth are Claire, Elise, Grace, Jess, Chris, Ben, Kelly, Sharon, kind of the anchor of my life. And when I say that, everything in the day changes. And then the third thing is, in 2 weeks, my grandchildren are going to welcome a brown Labradoodle puppy into their world. My son-in-law believes he has finally worn his wife down. My daughter had her first panic attack anticipating the arrival of the puppy. And my grandchildren believe it's the greatest thing in the history of the world. So I bet you have your own list. The idea of being around children for me is one of life's great things. So I hope you have a chance to volunteer for Vacation Bible School. You will experience every day something you did not anticipate for which you will be grateful. I guarantee it. Your life will change. Because children are so important, there's a story where the disciples ask Jesus, who's the greatest of them all? And he brings some children to his knee and says, if you want to enter the kingdom of God, you first must become like a child. And it's that story that is what we put on the stained glass window the church has in the library. The picture of Jesus gathering with the children. It's an incredible story. In this part of Matthew, the 20th chapter, we make a turn, a shift, where Jesus is headed towards the cross. And the stories change from a 1941 Disney-esque Dumbo to a 2019 Grimm's fairy tale that would make Tim Burton blush. He would turn his head away. You will hear in the stories I tell gore and grisly details that you would think could not come out of the mouth of Jesus. They're an R-rated graphic novel gore fest in which he wants to prod you and poke you to make you notice something and warn you about a future you would not think is possible. And for Christians who wonder if God is still on their side when they get a cold or can't find a parking place on Christmas Eve, you will discover a community that is tortured and killed because of their faith and who stay faithful nonetheless. So I want you to pay attention. I want you to hear the warning of Jesus. These last 5 chapters of Matthew are graphic and difficult to hear, and Jesus wants to warn you about what's coming. There is this primary event that shapes the end of Jesus' life that doesn't happen for 35 years. The religious leaders, Sadducees, Pharisees, and the rabbis, are going to sow the seeds of sedition and plant mass hysteria in the crowds so that they will believe they can throw off the Roman Empire simply by the force of their will and their army. They instead invite, with fury and out mercy, garrisons of soldiers that come into Jerusalem and destroy the city, knocking the temple that has stood for 500 years to the ground, not one stone left upon the other. Houses are razed, and the nation of Israel itself disappears from the face of the planet. Jesus has come at a time when he invited the people of Israel not to listen to them, but instead to become his followers. He said, I am like a mother hen who has tried to bring you in, but you would not come. And do you remember near the end of his life when there is a trial and he is found guilty, and the leader of the Roman Empire says to the crowds, I will let him go if you want. Just call out his name. Do you remember what they did? They called out Barabbas, the zealot, the insurrectionist. It was foretelling what was going to happen in 35 years when everything would be lost. So Jesus' requirement, what is he going to do, is he's going to be gone for 35 years. How will the disciples stay together? What will be the nature of the community? If Israel is gone and the church is nothing but a subset of Israel, then there will be nothing left of the movement Jesus has started. How will he make them hold together? If they understand that Jesus Christ is the source of mercy and goodness and light, how will they hold on to that when the rest of the world is going to hell in a handbasket, when there is chaos and murder everywhere? Is this what you came to church for? Okay. My only defense for what I'm going to do is that Emily gave me this passage, and you know how deeply dark a human being she is. Jesus tells 3 parables. May I kind of walk you through? And he sets them up with first, and then the clouds get worse in the second, and then they get horrendous. It's going to be a story of wages and war and a wedding. It begins with this parable. There was a landowner who early in the morning went out to the place where people gather to find work. And he said, would you come work for me? How much will you pay us? I'll give you a day's wages, a denarius. And they said, we'd love to. And they go to work. 3 hours later at 9 o'clock, they work 12-hour days from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. 3 hours later at 9 o'clock, he goes back out, and there are more people sitting around waiting for work. And he said, would you come work for more? They said, we'd love to work for you. How much? Denarius. That would be perfect. And he brings them in. Noon, he goes out again. And he does the same thing at 3. He goes out at 5 o'clock when there's only an hour left in the day. He sees people standing around, says, would you like to come work for me? We would love to work for you. And they go work for an hour. I've told Emily this is like growing up blue collar. This is my least favorite story in all of the scriptures. And the only lesson I get from it is you should sleep in as long as you can and show up and work for an hour and get a day's pay. That's the story that's a lesson. So the interesting thing about the story is the landowner pays everybody at the end of the day. And he has them line up to get paid. And the people he pays first are the people he hired last. The last will be first and the first will be last. That happens. He says that over and over. And they get a denarii. Now the people that have been there since 6 in the morning are going, this is our lucky day. If they who worked an hour got a day's wages, we're going to make out like bandits. And then he gets to the next, and everybody was paid the same thing. Now the people who were paid the most are thrilled. The people who were paid the same, everybody got the same, are furious. They're envious. The Greek says that they have a darkened eye. That is, they can't see the world correctly. It's like they're blind. They can't see the good that's happened because they always think about themselves. It's like no matter how hard I try, I cannot cheer Bryce Harper for hitting a home run for the Philadelphia Phillies. Right? Like I know it's mercy for some part of the world, but it just seems wrong. They are furious, and they have an eye that stops them from seeing mercy. And envy is going to be what happens to all of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Their inability to see Jesus as a source of mercy, a source of goodness, the thing that they appreciate, the one that causes gratitude and a smile. Their inability to see that is going to end with Jesus' death. Second parable he tells. There was a landowner who for decades built vineyards. He hired servants, and the servants planted the vineyards. They dug the trenches so they could be watered. They built a high tower so they could be defended. And when it came time to gather up the grapes from wine, he sent in his slaves. And when the slaves arrived to gather up they were told to get out. The people that were working the vineyards decided that the wine belonged to them, that they weren't going to give it over. They worked hard. This was theirs. It belonged to them. Get out. And they murdered the people that had been sent in to harvest the grapes. Well, the landowner heard about it and sent in a new group of slaves and said, go get my grapes. Well, they murdered them too. Then the landowner said, well, this is too much. I'm sending in my son. At least they'll respect my son. Nothing will happen to him. And what do you think they did? They murdered his son. And then he says to the Sadducees that he's talking to, now what would you do if that happened? What do you think the landowner should do? He said, kill them all. He tells a third story. Now this one is the R-rated, don't let the kids not sleep at night by telling them story. It's not bedtime. It's not depicted in the window in our library. It goes like this. There was a king who prepared a wedding for his son. He slaughtered the fatted calf. He brought in the best food. He brought in the best dress, the best clothing. He brought in beautiful music. And they in the center of town had rented a hall where everyone would come that wanted to enjoy the wedding. He then sent his servants out into the countryside to gather the people that had been invited. Come, come. And they went, oh, I'm so busy. I have so many other things to do. You just go ahead and have your wedding. But there was a group who were so irritated by the invitation that they slaughtered the people who invited them. This is graphic, ugly stuff, graphic novel stuff. I mean, you don't have to describe the knives and the pitchforks. You don't have to describe the blood to imagine in your mind the pictures that Jesus is drawing for those who are just listening to his words. He is like a painter with a brush and broad strokes who's making plain a warning. When they had murdered the people that had sent out the invitation, do you know what the king did? He sent in an army to destroy all of the murderers, and then he set the city on fire. I didn't make up the story. Set the city on fire so that you have all over the city mayhem and people burning to death and people being murdered and slaughtered. And then in the middle of it all, at the town hall, there is a wedding going on. This is apocryphal images, right? There's a wedding going on. And so the people show up for the wedding. He sends out slaves again. And he says, I want you to go invite anybody from the street. Anybody that's willing to come, they can come to the wedding. And then you know what upsets the king? The person who's throwing the wedding for his son. You know why he's mad? Somebody from the outside comes into the wedding not wearing a tuxedo. Well, obviously this is apocryphal. So let me do a little bit of what this story is about. The world is going to devolve into absolute chaos. And what Jesus is describing is exactly what happens. There are two mothers of the disciples who come to Jesus one day, and they said, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom, I want my son to sit at your right hand and your left hand. I want my sons to be at the top of the pyramid. And Jesus says, do you have any idea what you're asking? Do you know how this kingdom is going to come? The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Do you understand? And the disciples say, we get it. We're ready. We're signed up. And he says, you're right, for they will turn you over to be tortured, and they will kill you. And you will be hated in all the nations of the world for my name's sake. He's warning them. This is going to be awful. And then he says the church is going to be a place different than the chaos of the world. And if you come in without getting dressed properly, like anybody can come into the party, but once you come in, you can't bring the ways of a war-waging world into the church. But in the church, you have to be a place of mercy. So you better get dressed up. You better know how to sing. You better know how to dance. You better know how to eat. You better know how to drink. You better know how to laugh when you see each other's face. You ought to believe that in this place there is mercy, abundant mercy for all. Out there, there's darkness and the gnashing of teeth. But in here, in this place, there's mercy. They can't see it. They don't know what they said no to. But here we know. In Jesus Christ is the fountain of mercy you've been looking for. Near the end of the book of Joy, Desmond Tutu tells a story along with the Dalai Lama. Anthony Ray Hinton spent 30 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. He was working in a locked factory at the time of the crime that he was being accused of. When he was arrested in the state of Alabama in the United States, he was told by the police officers that he would be going to jail because he was black. He spent 30 years in a 5 by 7 foot cell in solitary confinement, allowed out only 1 hour a day. During his time on death row, Hinton became a counselor and friend not only to the other inmates, 54 of whom were put to death, but to the death row guards, many of whom begged Hinton's attorneys to get him out. When a unanimous Supreme Court ruling ordered his release, he was finally able to walk free. Quote, one does not know the value of freedom until one has it taken away. People run out of the rain, I run into the rain. How can anything that falls from heaven not be precious? Having missed the rain for so many years, I'm so grateful for every drop just to feel it on my face. When Hinton was interviewed on 60 Minutes, the interviewer asked whether he was angry at those who put him in jail. He responded that he had forgiven all the people who had sent him to jail. The interviewer incredulously asked, but they took 30 years of your life. How can you not be angry? Hinton responded, if I'm angry and unforgiving, they will have taken the rest of my life. How did Jesus prepare the disciples who had spent a lifetime learning to respect the Sadducees and Pharisees and rabbis, the 1%, the most educated and respected people among them, the ones who are the first? How does he warn them that that is the group that will attack them torture them, and kill them. And the people they spend a lifetime trying to avoid, the unclean, the untouchable, the reprobates, that those people would become their very best friends, the people who appreciate mercy the deepest. That's who we are. Not the first, but the last. And the one we follow wasn't the first, but the last, till God raised him from the dead and made him the first among us all. Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Amen.